Here we are in '92, and you've got this new record out. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the record? It's on Chick Corea's new label.
That's right.
Which is pretty exciting.
Stretch.
What hand did Chick have in the process?
Well, he and his partner Ron Moss established the record company, and it's in association with GRP. And that's basically it. I mean, they are the record company. Chick called me. Actually, Ron called me when I was living in New York, and he invited me to one of Chick's shows, and he said, "Let's go out for dinner afterwards. I want to talk to you about something." So I went, and afterwards we went out to the New York deli, and they said, "We're starting a record company. Would you be interested?" And I said yes, and we continued to talk, and eventually decided to do it. And basically, we didn't see Chick again, mainly because of his touring schedule. He was on the road a lot. We were making a record, and we didn't see him or even speak with him until we were mixing. And basically, he and Ron just came in and said, "Sounds great." The beauty of that situation is, obviously Chick's a music lover, as is his partner Ron, and they signed myself and John Patitucci to the label. Those are the only two artists. They're the first two artists. So their philosophy is whatever it is, we're signing it not to mess with it,
Which is cool. That's cool.
Oh, it's unbelievable. It's complete artistic freedom, and even in terms of how we want to present ourselves, everything. It's like, it's what we want to do. Of course, in conjunction with them, but it's perfect. It's just a great relationship.
You'd think a label that Chick Corea would put together would be putting out jazz, for instance, and you've got a real solid blues record here.
Yeah.
Was that ever a question in the process?
Never. They wanted us to do our thing.
Great.
And as far as the artists that they're going to expand. In general, I won't be surprised if it remains, largely a jazz-oriented thing. But on the other hand, I think GRP, the mother company here, has gotten so excited about the group, and they really see Stretch as an opportunity for them to branch out into other aspects of the, music field. And so we'll see what happens. They all might just decide to get real experimental,
Well, it sounds like a plus for everybody then.
Really is.
All over the bios and things that I have, of course, they're mentioning jazz and fusion and all that kind of thing. Is there a direct connection for you with blues and, shall we say, fusion then?
Well, the fusion aspect of it, that's a word that a lot of people don't care for. I'm not, I don't care one way or the other. But I went through a period of working with, first of all, the LA Express and Joni Mitchell, and the LA Express was a fusion, you could say, band,
Right.
Very much so. And from there, having worked with them for about 2 years, I started the band that became the Yellow Jackets. It's a fusion band, and my reputation sort of came out of that. Heard about me because, frankly, it's a matter of putting out records that have some visibility. So I was labeled as a studio musician and a fusion guitarist, which neither one of them, for me, was my interest. And I must say it was a little confusing, even for myself. Those bands were both, the LA Express and the Yellow Jackets, were opportunities to play with really good musicians. And that's kind of one of the appealing sides of the fusion world. A lot of the best musicians are there. But the music that first turned me on as a kid and as a guitarist beyond, the early, I was always glued to the radio, and I grew up on, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Who and all of those bands. The first thing that really turned me on as a guitar player was the Paul Butterfield Blues Band with Mike Bloomfield on guitar. So that's what, made me really get serious about guitar playing. And, the influences from there, Mike Bloomfield, B.B. King, and Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton. And my interest in jazz kind of evolved from there into Coltrane, Miles Davis. So my musical roots are very much in, traditional American music. Not even so much rock and roll, but more blues and jazz. And, the fusion thing happened after that, and it was sort of, again, an opportunity to play with some great musicians, and that's where you found a lot of the jazz players, And from there, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and the first record that I wound up putting out after, my first solo record, which I guess you haven't heard, it's called The Inside Story. It was on Elektra Records. That was a fusion record, and the band that did the record turned into the Yellow Jackets, so I recorded with them. From there, my next record was the Talk to Your Daughter album on Warner Brothers, which was nominated for Best Contemporary Blues Recording that year. So, again, it's the exposure that I've had has been, to great extent as a fusion artist and maybe even studio musician, But that's just because of records.
But you keep coming back to blues naturally then.
That's right.
What is it about that? Can you put your finger on it? Like for instance, in jazz, fusion, there's a lot of ways to show off your chops, shall we say. Mm-hmm. Same in blues, but I don't know, maybe there's more soul in blues or something. Is that the feeling for you?
Absolutely. I like music that has, passion in it. And that's what turned me on about blues. I mean, it was so serious,
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was so gutsy, so emotional. And the jazz records that I was listening to, and particularly drawn to, were very much the same way, which was Coltrane in particular, and also Miles Davis's music. I mean, he was obviously, became quite the modernist and pioneer, but his music always had like feeling and tone. He had a tone and a voice, and that's very important for me. The instrument you play is an extension of your voice, which is an extension of your emotions and what you have to say. So it's not an exercise in being flashy on an instrument, I mean, that's, if anything, secondary,
Well, since you mentioned him, how was it working with Miles?
It was a treat. And we had a good relationship, It lasted only 6 months, and I really wanted to move on. I had my deal with Warner's, and I wanted to get into the studio, do the Talk to Your Daughter album, and start working on my own. But the 6 months that I spent with him, he was really good to me, and he used to just call me on the telephone. I was living in New York, and he'd just call me on the phone to talk, and he'd play some little tape for me over the phone, of something we'd been doing, and
he was really sharing stuff with you.
Yeah, it was great. He'd go, Robben, listen to this, and he'd play like a guitar solo I'm doing. He'd go, you're playing your ass off. He was great, man.
Yeah. Did you learn anything in particular from him that you can put your finger on?
Well, I'd been listening to him for so many years, and he truly had become my number one musical icon. So it wasn't like I hadn't already been to his school, But the one thing that did come out of it for me was he kind of, his stamp of approval gave me a certain confidence that I might have lacked before. I mean, I was always a fairly confident musician. It's not like, I wasn't already kind of there. But at the same time, when you have someone like him say he digs you, then it really, it made it easier for me to work with other, musicians.
You just can't ignore that kind of push, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it was just great.
Well, let's compare that to working with Muddy Waters.
We opened for him. The band that I had with my brothers, it was like my first real band, away from home. I was like 18, 19, and we had a quartet with my older brother on drums and my younger brother on blues harp and a bassist and myself. And it was called the Charles Ford Band. It was named after my dad because he sort of sired 3 of us, It's kind of an honorific thing. And we opened for him at this club in San Francisco called the Keystone Corner.
Sure, yeah, I've been there.
Yeah? This was like the original one on Vallejo Street in North Beach, and everybody used to play there, jazz and blues. And we used to get to open for most of the blues acts because we were sort of the hot blues band in town. And Muddy came out during our second set and just walked up on the stage and started singing with us.
Great.
It was a gas. And afterwards, on the, when he went on for his second set, he said something about us. He goes, "Those boys play the blues right." It was great.
Well, you can't get a better recommendation, huh?
That's right.
Yeah. Is there anyone else you've worked with perhaps is, I don't know, particularly special?
Yeah, I mean, I've had real good fortune in that way. Like, the people that I have worked with have been sort of the tops in their field. I started out with Joni Mitchell, who is, kind of singularly Joni Mitchell. Michael McDonald, who, for me is one of the most brilliant pop artists. David Sanborn, who's obviously the premier cat on the alto, But Joni, I would say, was real special. I would love to have the opportunity to work with her again if it could ever happen. I toured with her in '74 for the most part of a year.
That was the Miles of Isles thing?
That's right. And again in '76 we did a tour on the Hissing of Summer Lawns LP. And I mean, she's just one of those, brilliant artists. She's a brilliant artist. And, she combines melody, intelligence, soul, harmonic. Her stuff is real different sounding. Her chords are not just, standard folk chords. She was just really special. That for me was probably the greatest fun I ever had for, an extended period of time on the road. It was such a pleasure. I mean, it was the first time I had, even had an opportunity to play with, a famous pop artist. And the band was the LA Express, and all those guys were brilliant musicians, so, it couldn't have been better.
Right now I'm thinking of the Blue Line album. Where does that thick, full guitar tone of yours come from?
Well,
I mean, that is heavy-duty stuff.
Thank you. Well, I guess it's a combination of things. I use, in particular, a Howard Dumble. Actually, it's just called the Dumble Overdrive Special. That's the amplifier. It's a custom built, and he builds very few of them. They're all custom, and like Stevie Ray used the Dumble, Larry Carlton uses Dumble, Eric Johnson uses a Dumble. It's like kind of people who are really interested in tone, will eventually gravitate towards that amplifier. It's a real strong amp. And
how do you spell that name?
D-U-M-B-L-E. Yeah, it's the Dumble Overdrive Special. And that's real important to my sound. I have a guitar that is the Signature Series Robben Ford model that Fender makes, and it's humbucking pickups, which are beefier than like the Strat pickups. Strat's kind of the guitar of choice for most people. I still seem to prefer the humbucking pickups. And beyond that, I like a big sound. I go for a big sound, and I think the absence of effects is important to that. Effects they spread your sound out, and they can have a tendency, to me, to make the guitar a little less present, It becomes a little more atmospheric. And I like it real straight. It's pretty much just guitar and amp.
So we're talking, basically tone rather than effect.
Yeah.
In terms of effect, thanks for putting some wah-wah in there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the only other guy, like Stevie Ray was using it, quite a bit. But still, it's something that hadn't really come back, and it seemed to be time for it again.
Of course, years ago, wah-wah was just about it.
Yeah, that's right. Wah-wah and phase shifter, fuzz tone.
So working in a trio, does that have any effect on your playing then?
Yeah, it makes me work a lot harder. There's an aspect of getting down constantly, that is always present, and it definitely has an effect on the way all of us play. Both Tom Brechtlein, the drummer, and Roscoe Beck, the bassist. We've all evolved in a certain direction, due to this trio situation, which makes it more intense. Seems to make it just more intense and even focused. Simplicity becomes even more important. Strangely, you might think with a trio, it's like, you have to play a lot more.
Fill it up.
Yeah, and in a sense, it's more the intention that becomes more intense for us than necessarily playing a lot more. It's just a real straight-ahead approach. It creates a certain intensity that doesn't really exist. The more instruments you add, everyone relaxes a little bit, which is good. But the fewer the instruments, then you just have to be a lot more on the ball.
Now it seems to me I've seen Roscoe play. Was it with I think Eric Johnson? Did he tour with him?
He did, but he did play bass on the Tones LP, Eric's first solo album on Reprise. That's Roscoe on bass, and the Avia Musicom record he played on about half that one. So he's been an important bassist for Eric.
Just tell me briefly about playing live. You do a lot of session work, of course, but
not really. Like I was saying earlier, it was I got a reputation as a session man, but I've done more records than some, but far fewer than many. The people who I don't know if it's still the case, but people used to sort of include me in a lump with Larry Carlton and Lee Rittenauer, people like that. Those guys made a lot of records. I made a few records, and I never really did get into the television and commercial and all of that stuff. My desire has always been to play live. So if I wasn't able to do it with my own band, I tried to do it with other bands. I never wanted to get into that studio musician, go to the studio, work all day, come home, go off on the weekends. It's just not my approach.
Live music is it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that for me is a feeling that music is complete when there's musicians, music, and an audience.
Yeah.
Is there a feeling like that for you?
Very much. And it's the band is actually getting a lot of exposure right now. It's growing, here in the States, and in Europe we do really well. And the audiences become continually more friendly, and into it. And we just did a couple of shows up around the Bay Area. We played San Francisco and Santa Cruz, and it was just amazing how warm the people were and supportive, into it, wanted you to do great, and you can't help but want to make them happy.
Right.
So you get a real exchange going on, and that is tremendous. That's the best. It's what it's all about, isn't it? That's what music is about. It's about communication.
Right, and especially like you were saying, once you get through everything, it's actually your emotions that are coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Sharing, I guess.
Yeah.
What's the basic fuel that keeps you going in terms of music?
Well, I love to play. It's really as simple as that. I just love to play. And I've always had this, so I have kind of an arranger's mind, Like, I listen to music, and I just can't help, really investigating it, I don't want to say analyzing it, because it's not quite like that. I hear a tune, and I'm immediately thinking about, how can I work this into my music, What could I do to get this kind of a thing into my music? So it's, it's a passion,
Do you think there are still some sounds to discover?
Sounds?
Uh-huh.
Guitar sounds?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
No doubt. And in fact, that is something, we were talking about the kind of more straight tone as opposed to the effects tone.
Right, uh-huh.
And I want to keep true to that. But it seems to be in guitars, guitars sound different. Gretsch, Gibson, Fender Strat, Fender Tele. I've got my own custom guitar. And so I'm investigating more guitars now, as opposed to just sticking to one instrument. So that's where I'm looking for it. I want to keep it true, and there is some kind of a limit to it. there's got to be. I mean, you got 3 pickups, you got an amp, you know. I mean, there aren't that many variables, but you know, where it's creative, I think, is more what you do with it.